All right, Sid, I appreciate you being here.
Cool. Thanks for having me. I appreciate coming.
Yeah. So we don't date these shows generally, but during the pandemic era, we're doing that because it's what we do. So today, I think, is the 6th, right? Yesterday was Cinco de Mayo, whatever it is, an excuse for everybody to drink, I guess. And today's the day after. So the 6th of May, hopefully we're going to be coming out of it soon here in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, hopefully.
You've been keeping yourself busy?
If by busy you mean watching Netflix and working in my recording studio and sitting with my dogs on my lap, then I have been very, very busy.
Well, there's worse ways to go through idle time, right?
Yeah, sure. I've also been, I've been learning how to cook a little bit, which I'm not really a cook. So since I can't go out to eat, that's like the biggest thing. I don't go to coffee shops 3 times a day, and I don't eat out every day.
Yeah, I think a lot of us are suffering from that. Yeah, and it's funny, too. I probably haven't. There's 2 ways to go, I think, during this pandemic. I've seen people that have gone off the deep end with junk food and booze and make light of it. I get it. And then there's the other way to try to really use the time to analyze how bad we've been and try to correct some things. So I've kind of like laid off the booze completely and tried to eat better and stuff. And I realized at the end of last month, like, wow, I go out to eat a lot.
I go out to eat a lot. Here to put things in context, when there was a time period I had moved to Denver from Los Angeles, and that was in February of 2009.
Okay.
In June of 2009, I met Brenda Stump, who was going to be my girlfriend. After that.
Right.
And so one day she says, "Hey, I want to come to your house and make you some food." And I said, yeah, sounds great. So she comes over and, she sees that in my kitchen, I've got pots and pans and all this cooking stuff. She thinks, score, this dude totally cooks. But really, I just had a bunch of stuff for my daughter because she likes to cook. I thought this will be a cool thing. My daughter will come by and she'll make dinner with me.
Right.
She was like 16. She never came by once. But so she thinks that I'm going to be like this big cook. She opens my refrigerator. There is not anything, zero anything in my refrigerator. And she goes, there's nothing in your refrigerator. Yeah. She goes, well, where do you eat? I said, I've eaten out every single meal since February, and it's now June. I've never once cooked in my house. Wow.
Yeah. And I think that's I don't know. And we've evolved over the last 20, 30 years of being a people that eat out a hell of a lot. Because, I don't know what it was like when you were a kid, but I was lucky like once every 4 months if my dad would drive into the McDonald's parking lot. That was a win.
Yeah. Not only was eating out a win for me, I grew up with just my mom. She was not a very good cook. So going out was like, oh my God, an actual meal that tastes like something that I want to eat. And then, so she didn't teach me how to cook.
Yeah.
And then I was like in LA, I was in rock bands, like just a starving rocker dude. I didn't have any money.
Yeah.
And then eventually I had success and I was like on tour.
Right.
So I was in a tour bus.
Right.
And, there's no kitchen on a tour bus, unless microwaving Pop-Tarts is a kitchen. And then, so I literally never learned how to cook until really recently. Even like I can make hummus. I'm like, oh my God, I can make hummus. I'm like, I've went from hopeless to hummus, and
hopeless to hummus.
And so I'm trying to use this quarantine as an opportunity to learn how to cook a little.
Okay, well, see, there's something positive coming out of it, right?
Yeah.
So give me the 5-minute life tour, which I know that's asking a lot of someone to concise their entire life in 5 minutes, but give us the history of how it all started for you. So
I was born in Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
My mom was divorced. I was the only child, so just me and her.
Okay.
Moved around a lot. 6 different elementary schools in 6 years. Like I was always the new kid. I didn't really have any friends. And she really didn't pay much attention to me. She was kind of self-absorbed. So I was left to my own devices to entertain myself. Right. And the thing that really clicked with me was music. That's where I found like my niche, the thing that really made me happy.
Okay.
And at some point I played violin for a little while,
right.
But then I picked up drums. Like I'd be in orchestra class looking across the room and I'd be like, look at those drums over there. God damn it, I almost want to go smash those things. They look so rad. And so I learned how to play drums, and in short order I was in a band. And by the time I was 15, I had quit high school and I was out on the road playing in bars. I couldn't even drive a car, but I was playing like 4 sets of cover songs every night in bars, 6 nights a week. And I eventually went back to school and finish that out. But in 1985, I moved to LA with my band, and I was in Los Angeles for almost 25 years. And while I was there, I was in 4 different bands with major record deals.
Wow.
And which was what I went to Los Angeles to do. I went there to be a rock star and get a record deal.
Right.
And that it was really cool. I'm really feel blessed that I was able to do that. And one of those bands was a band called Two. It featured Rob Halford from Judas Priest. And also in that band was John Five on guitar and a guy named James Woolley on keyboards, and he was from Nine Inch Nails. And then a guy, Ray Riondo, from a band called Machines of Loving Grace. So it was all really good musicians. I felt like I was pulling up the rear for sure.
Right on.
But that was great. I got to play with Halford, and, who gets to do that? Not many guys have got to do that. We toured all over the world, played, just giant concerts and little club gigs, everything in between. It was super fun, and what a pleasure that was. And then I left that band, and I joined a band called Sinistar that was on Geffen Records. And that band signed a huge record deal, and we got a big push, but we can talk about that.
We'll get there.
Yeah, and then I left that band in 2002 to become to work in production, so engineering and producing, and I got to work with Alice Cooper and Tony Iommi and like Seether and Saliva. Tracked Dave Grohl on drums, and got to do a whole bunch of cool stuff. But at some point in about 2008. The industry, like the revenue from the industry to pay people like me, was just evaporating into nothing. And so I just kind of said, you know what? I'm going to peace out on this. I'm just going to leave the industry. I checked all the boxes I wanted to do, was in bands, toured the world, produced records that were like number 1 on the radio, did all kinds of really cool stuff.
Right.
I was like, I think I can leave with my head held high and just go do something else. And at that point, what I did is I started a company that does research on investing and trading strategies. And I still have that company now. It's basically my bread and butter. But I also, of course, I'm a musician at heart. So I have a recording studio.
Yes.
And I take on projects now.
Incredible here in Pittsburgh. Incredible.
Thank you. So I do still make music, and I just pick and choose the bands I want to work with. I don't have to, I'm not beholden to having to pay my mortgage from my studio.
Right.
So I really get to, I feel really, really blessed. I get to just take my time on a project with a band, which is something that's probably that most bands don't get the opportunity to do because they're on the clock. They don't have much money. They're going to have to we're going to do a record in 2 days. I'm like, you're making a demo in 2 days is what you're doing. But if guys come work with me, we can take our time. We can slow it down. That's how I know how to make a record. It's it's going to take 2 months to make a record, or maybe more. And so that's kind of where I'm at right now. And and I'm getting ready to
selling his studio.
Yes, I am. And that's another story. Yeah, the whole reason I'm even in Pittsburgh, like I said, I was in Los Angeles, and in 2008 I left Los Angeles because I was no longer in the music industry. Didn't need to be there anymore. Didn't need to pay for all the expensive LA everything and drive for 5 hours a day. And so I just said, well, I can basically go anywhere I want and do my research. I could live anywhere. I thought about moving to Shanghai, China.
Really?
Because I had been there relatively recently before that, and I thought, man, this is like Blade Runner. It's so cool. I think I want to go there and just live there for a while. But at that same time, my daughter, who was 16 at the time, had kind of emancipated, and she was saying, I'm moving to Denver. And I said, well, if you're moving to Denver, I'll move to Denver. So I ended up going to Denver.
Okay.
And met my girlfriend, and my girlfriend's an artist, and at one point she was making bigger and bigger work that wasn't fitting in the art spaces that she needed to, that she was renting. And we just thought, let's buy a building. It wasn't going to happen there. It was too expensive. So we ended up looking at all kinds of cities all over the country. And Pittsburgh was by far hands down the best choice. It was totally affordable to buy a really cool building that you could renovate.
Right.
And it's also a great city. It's restaurants and culture and sports, and it's a city. So we ended up here in 2015, and I renovated this giant church that has a art studio and a house and a recording studio, and it's really fantastic. And now I'm selling it.
Of course you are.
Of course. Yeah, of course, I went completely insane renovating this building, just like emotionally, and it was so much. Where I was the general contractor on it, so
oh God,
I was hiring and firing all the trades.
God bless you.
And managing everything, and it was way more expensive than I ever dreamed it would be. I had no idea. I mean, in my mind, I had this number that I just literally pulled out of thin air. I thought, well, this can't cost it any more than this number, and wow, did it cost more than that number, and then some. But yeah, so now we're totally done, and it's really rad. It's so cool. I know I'm going to sell the building.
Yeah, and then you're on to something else, right?
I am on to something else, yeah. And the something will not include winter.
So you're a change of geography for you.
Yeah, it will be. I'm probably going to move to the desert. Like,
nice.
I hate cold weather, and I'm reminded by how much I hate cold weather every time I'm walking my dogs in the winter and it's snowing and it's raining or it's just cold. I'm like, I hate cold. I hate it. So that's not why I'm selling my building, but. If I don't have my building, there's no reason that I can go anywhere.
Understood.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you noticed about Pittsburgh because you lived in multiple locations. We have a lot of gray skies here.
Yeah. Peace. Oh my God. Yeah. I thought to myself, well, I spend so much time. I'm in my office or I'm in my recording studio. I'm always inside anyway.
Yeah.
If it's gray, whatever, it's sunny. It's going to be sunny part of the year, and it is sunny part of the year. But it really wears on me because what I didn't take into account was I'm out of my house 4, 5, 6 times a day. Yeah. I'm going to get up first thing in the morning, we'll go grab a coffee. I'm going to come and do some work. At lunch, I'm going to go grab a coffee and grab some lunch. I'm going to come home. Dinner, I'm going to go out for dinner. And and I'm going to walk my dogs 3 or 4 times a day. Now I'm realizing, I actually do spend a lot of time outside in the gray, and I never even really thought about it because I had always lived in places. Los Angeles is beautiful. Right. The weather's fantastic. And so I just didn't really put 2 and 2 together. But
I think we're just so used to it. And for those of us who are native Pittsburgh folk, we're just used to it. But when you get the opportunity to spend time away from this town in nicer climates and you come back, it's real apparent.
Yeah.
It's real apparent. And every time we get a blue sky around here, we have to make note of it.
Yeah, even today driving over it, like this morning, it was cold and like misty and drizzly, but by the time I drove over here, it was sunny and nice.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God, it's amazing. I even had to put my visor down so that the sun didn't shine in me, my eyes.
Yeah, you don't use the visor as much in Pittsburgh.
Well, I did today, and I was happy about it.
Let's go back to your move to Los Angeles in '85. And I realized there was a lot of debauchery and craziness in L.A. In the music scene in that era. But can you speak even generally about what you saw? Was it as crazy as most rock and roll fans always heard it was?
Yeah, it was all that and then some. And I was in a band that was called The Wild, not The Mild. and that band,
apropos,
that band lived up to its name. Yeah, and it was. I'm really happy that I got to live there, and I was in a band that was in that scene where all these great bands came out of, and my band did really well there as well. But even one of the guys in my band, Dizzy Reed, he got plucked and joined Guns N' Roses, and my band had, we had gotten demo deals and we never quite got signed, but we had worked our way up through the club ranks, and we're playing, headlining on the weekends and on the Sunset Strip, like you are supposed to try to do, and it was crazy. It's hard to explain too, because the Sunset Strip is only about 2 blocks long, and on the weekends, on just one side of the street, from the Whiskey to Gil Turner's at Doheny, that's about maybe 3 blocks. There's the Whiskey, there's the Roxy, there's the Rainbow, there's Gazzari's. And on just one side of the street on the weekends, there would be probably 5 or 10,000 people.
It's amazing.
On just one side of the street, on the side where the clubs are. There was no one on the other side of the street. And it was just so many people. And it's all rocker people, 80s hair metal people. And so you have your flyers, there's 10,000 people there that you're going to hand out flyers to, and you're going to meet people, and you're going to hustle your band, and then you play there, and a lot of parties afterwards, and a lot of madness ensued, like you would expect, from the legends that are there. Mm-hmm. But in that time period, my band, we were just broke out rocker dudes, and we weren't going to get jobs, so we scraped up whatever money we could, and we rented this little rehearsal studio. It was 11 feet by 19 feet, and we had all of our gear in it, and all the guys on our band, we all slept in it, just like little dudes and like guys in a coffin side by side. We would all have to decide, okay, it's time to go to bed now. We would all just lay down on the floor, and we had a pickup truck out in the parking lot that we kept all of like sleeping bags and mats in. And so we called it the sleepest gear. So every night at some point we would all just say, yeah, I guess it's time to pull out the sleepest gear, and we'll lay it out in our little rows, and we'll go to sleep until the morning.
That's nuts.
Yeah. And we had no bathroom, no shower. So if to use the restroom, you had to go to the Denny's around the corner.
Okay.
And to shower, you had to go find someone's house that could let you use their shower. And we were in that studio, this little 11 by 19 foot studio, playing, practicing and partying and bringing people over there and going crazy, until a studio next door, the next door on the other side of the wall, was a bigger studio. It was about the size of a 2-car garage. And man, we thought if at any time we can move into that studio, that's going to be like a mansion. It's going to be amazing. And eventually we did. We get to move into this studio next door, and we could sleep anywhere we wanted. We had a couch in there, but then our studio, our old one, was vacant.
Right.
And a young and not yet signed Guns N' Roses moved into the studio next door to us.
That's incredible.
Yeah, so they were our next door neighbors. So Guns N' Roses. That's how Dizzy Reed eventually gets plucked and joins Guns N' Roses, because we met them back then. In fact, when we found out that GNR, this new band GNR, was going to be our next door neighbors, we were out at the Troubadour handing out flyers for our show at the Troubadour. And I saw Izzy Stradlin.
Right.
He was handing out flyers for Guns N' Roses to play at the Troubadour. And I said, hey, you're in Guns N' Roses, right? So yeah, well, we're going to be your next door neighbors. And, a friend of ours has a keg of beer, which nobody has kegs of beer in Hollywood. We just happened to have a keg of beer. So I said to Izzy, hey, why don't we, after your show is before ours, after your show, why don't we just bring everybody back from your show over to the studios? We've got a keg of beer, and we'll have an after party. And he's kind of looked at me perplexed, and he goes, you guys are going to throw us a kegger? Because he's from Indiana, so he knew what that meant. And I'm like, yeah, I guess we are. And so we got along pretty well right off the bat. And so that, and then they, clearly they blew up, and the rest is history.
Right.
But
that's amazing.
Yeah. So that was kind of fun. But
did you see the Crew? Were you around the time that the Crew broke?
They had already broke.
Yeah, earlier.
Yeah, they broke when I was still in high school.
Yeah.
So they broke in like 81 or 82.
That early. So it was that early. They were done with the LA scene by what, like 83 or 84, I guess.
Well, they were still playing, they were, Girls, Girls, Girls and all that stuff was coming out then. They were still around.
They were more of an arena rock band.
They were an arena rock band for sure. You'd see them around at the Rainbow Music Hall. Not the Rainbow Music Hall, the Rainbow Bar and Grill. You'd see them around because, everybody lives there. So you see people. But
did you ever see Lemmy sitting there?
100 times. I hung out with him a bunch of times. He was so personable. He'd just be playing video games, and then me and Dizzy, when Dizzy finally was in Guns N' Roses, and backstory, he and I moved to Los Angeles together, so we were like best friends. We were thick as thieves, and like we could finish each other's sentences. And so one night he and I were out, and we ended up hanging out with Lemmy. Went over to Lemmy's house, and
that was an interesting apartment.
Yeah,
I hear.
Not much. I was expecting so much more.
Right. Everybody says that.
Yeah, but I saw Lemmy a bunch of times, and eventually, when Dizzy joined GNR, that band that I was in, The Wild, it basically broke up because it needed to have the 5 guys that were the band.
Right.
Without one of the key guys, it really wasn't the same band anymore.
Got it.
So that's when I kind of went out. I was like, getting enough for other different bands and stuff. And eventually I joined a band called Johnny Crash. on their second record. They had already done a first record that was well received, and their drummer needed to be replaced. When I came in, I was the second drummer in a band called Johnny Crash. And that band had finished the record. It was getting ready to come out. It was on WTG, CBS Records. But right at that time, Nirvana drops.
Yeah.
and
destroyed everything.
And Johnny Crash was a rock band. And like this, the Seattle bomb hit LA, and all the bands that had record deals that were like rock bands, old school rock bands, they all got dropped. And my band, the band I was in, Johnny Crash, got dropped. So I wasn't in a band with a record deal anymore. And then I don't know how many years later it was, probably not that long, but at one point, the band Guns N' Roses, they had toured the Use Your Illusion tours, like football stadiums with Metallica opening up for them, all over the world. They've been touring for like 3 or 4 years, and they were done touring. And Slash had a band called Snake Pit, and it was out on tour. Matt and Duff had a band called Neurotic Outsiders, and it was out on tour. And Gilby was no longer in the band, so there was nobody doing anything for Guns N' Roses.
Right.
And Axl reached out to Dizzy, and he said, "Hey, Dizzy, put Sid on salary, have him come down to the Complex," which is where they practice, a place called the Complex. It's this giant 5,000 square foot soundstage with like all the GNR gear there. And so he said,
that didn't suck.
No, it didn't suck at all. It was pretty fun. But he said, have him come down there. I want you guys to just write stuff for the benefit of Guns N' Roses. And I was never in Guns N' Roses. I have to say that. I have to caveat that. So some people will read into what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I was never in Guns N' Roses.
Hear that clearly?
Repeat after me. I was merely in a songwriting team that wrote music for the benefit of Guns N' Roses. So anybody who misquotes me, fuck off.
Fair enough.
But I did that for a year and a half. It was so much fun. We just would jam, and there was no... We weren't trying to write the next Appetite for Destruction. We were just, Axl just said, man, somebody please be creative for the benefit of Guns N' Roses, because everyone else was out doing other shit.
Right.
And so I did that for a year and a half. We would just, it was me and Dizzy and this guy Paul Hughey on guitar, and we would just jam. We'd just go down to this giant soundstage with all this gear and just start playing. When, Paul might start playing a guitar riff and I'd jump in, or I'd start playing a drum beat and they would jump in, or Dizzy would start playing, and we would just jam off the cuff for 45 minutes or an hour. And we had an engineer there recording the whole thing.
Right.
And once, we would kind of peter out, like any jam kind of peters out. And we kind of stop, and then we'd go over and listen to what we just did for the last 45 minutes or an hour. We'd just listen back, and we'd order some lunch, listen.
Right.
We'd be listening, yeah, cool, whatever, yeah. And they're like, oh, wow, that's really cool right there. And then we would make notes, like at 18 minutes and 32 seconds, rad riff on Thursday. We would just take notes, and we would just listen to it, and then we would piece these songs together, something from Thursday with this thing from Tuesday, and those two things together. Yeah. They would eventually make songs, and everything was born out of just jamming, right? Which was so much fun. It was amazing. It was so cool to just get to play with no agenda, with good musicians, and just like,
because that usually doesn't happen. Usually, because studio time is very expensive.
Totally.
And you need to go in there with some kind of idea to quote unquote knock it out, right?
Yeah, and usually a guitar player or the singer they sit at home, in their bedroom, they write a song, then they come to rehearsal. Hey, I've got a song, check it out. Here's how it goes. Add your shit to it. Or you play this and you play that. Right. It's very rarely literally born out of just riffing out of thin air. It doesn't normally happen that way. Some bands do, and I think you can kind of hear it when it does. But so that was amazingly fun.
I bet.
Yeah. And because I knew that I'm not in Guns N' Roses, I need to find a band for myself, a legit band, because that situation that I was doing there, it was going to have a lifespan. It was going to end. And right at that same time period, a friend of mine, a fellow named Jimmy Church, he was hanging out a lot with Rob Halford from Judas Priest. Right. And he's talking to Rob Halford one day, and he says, hey, what are you doing, Rob? And Rob says, forming a new band. I got this new guitar player. His name's John Lowry, John 5 today. And, the next guy I'm going to look for is a drummer. And so my buddy Jimmy, unbeknownst to me, completely unbeknownst to me, says, I know a guy, he's on a songwriting team with Guns N' Roses. He's an amazing drummer. You should call him. And so I'm just sitting at my house, flipping through channels, phone rings, and it's my buddy Jimmy. And he's like, hey, we're just talking shit. And he says, well, let me put you on the phone with somebody. And then he puts me on the phone with this fella, John Baxter, who's Rob Halford's manager. And then we're like, wow, I'm talking to Rob Halford's manager. Oh, I was just watching TV 5 minutes ago. So we're talking, and then like 3 or 4 minutes later, John Baxter says, hey, let me put you on the phone with Rob. Now I'm like on the phone with Rob Halford. And when I was a kid, I was a giant Judas Priest fan. Yeah. So I'm like, wow, 10 minutes ago I was watching TV. Now I'm on the phone with Rob Halford.
Yeah, it doesn't suck either.
Yeah, and he said, hey, I heard what you're doing with GNR. You know, I'm looking for a drummer for my band. You know, do you mind if we come down and see you play tomorrow? And I'm like, yeah, in my mind, fuck yeah, of course. But on the phone, I'm like, yeah, that'd be great. So
holding it together, right?
Well, there's a story to that, and I'll get to it.
Okay.
So they came down the next day, they watched me play, and then we went out to dinner, and we were just, do you vibe? Was I vibing with Rob, and was Rob vibing with me? They gave me a tape, said, do you like these songs? We listened to them in the car. I said, yeah, this is really cool. And it was kind of sounded like the first Filter record, kind of heavy, a little bit industrial. And I'm like, yeah, that's cool. It's right up my wheelhouse. And so I said, oh, cool. Let's play in a week. Go learn these songs. Let's jam next week. So, because in my mind, I'm a professional musician. I'm playing with the guys and Guns N' Roses people, and I've been in bands with record deals. Right. Like, to me, that just didn't seem weird at all. Like, okay, yeah, I'm going to go play with Rob Halford in a week. And I was just on the phone. Like last night I was watching television. Today I'm sitting with Rob Halford. Tomorrow next week I'm going to be playing with him. Right on. So I just deep dive and learned those songs inside and out, backwards, forwards, upside down. We could have played a gig at the
You were ready.
Yeah, the audition could have been a gig. Like I had that shit dialed tight. And so that day comes and it's still in my mind. I'm like, yeah, this is the thing that happens to a guy who's a professional musician. You just, you go, you do this audition, you learn the songs, and I was really cool-headed about it. And so we're in this, super professional rehearsal facility, and we're set up like a band on like live, like so, like a back line. Right. And there's big speakers, like monitors, big speakers, and there's like a stage, and then there's a place where people can watch you, from inside the studio, inside the rehearsal studio. Sure. So we launch into the first song, and it's sounding killer, and I'm like, yeah, it's sounding exactly like it's supposed to. And I can hear it. It's just blazing out of these giant monitors behind me. And standing right in front of me is Rob Halford. And he's got his back to me, just like you would be live. Right. And I remember this so clearly. We're jamming and it's sounding killer, and I can see he's kind of like he's bobbing his head. It's like, yeah, he's vibing with it. And then he gets ready to sing, and I just remember I saw his back heave up, like he was going to take a big breath, and his back heaved, and then like all of a sudden, bam! There's this Rob Halford vocal coming into my monitor, and it just hit me. Holy fuck! I'm jamming with Rob Halford, and it
wasn't until that moment.
It wasn't until that moment, till like bam, his vocal was in my monitor. I'm like, whoa, this is fucking awesome. And then I quickly maintain your composure, do the thing you're supposed to do as a professional musician, but that was really a fun moment.
Yeah,
yeah. Like
I bet
it just hit me like a ton of bricks for just like a split second. Like whoa.
Do me a favor, roll it back a couple years before that.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about your remembering of when Nirvana hit. Not Nirvana the band. You can certainly talk about them if you'd like, but what kind of sledgehammer they brought down on the quote-unquote hair band / heavy metal movement of that time.
Well, I have a couple thoughts on that.
Okay.
First, I didn't really think much about them, positive or negative. I just thought, oh, wow, this band is blowing up. They're kind of weird. Like, I didn't quite know what to make of them because I came from that old school of like rock bands. And so I didn't quite know what to make of them. And then there was these other bands coming along like Pearl Jam, and then bands like Soundgarden and, and Alice in Chains. They were all just like there all of a sudden. And so I didn't quite know what to make of it, but I felt the impact because my band got dropped. But I also...
You weren't the only ones.
No. But in hindsight, I think that was the right thing to happen. I think I think that music at that time, like the hair metal bands that kind of turned into just the rock bands, no one was really doing anything all that exciting. There was just a lot of bands doing a good version of the thing that came before them.
Right.
And nothing against those bands. They were all really good. But, if I'm a 12, 15-year-old kid in Iowa, I'm probably getting pretty bored of that, and then Nirvana comes along and just blows it open.
So help me understand that grunge thing, because I've really always been kind of confused. When I listen to Alice in Chains and I listen to Soundgarden, those two bands.
Awesome bands.
Yeah.
Soundgarden
and
especially.
Pearl Jam to a degree. Not the biggest fan of that band, but those three. I hear rock and roll bands. I hear rock and roll music, hard rock being played. I don't hear that in Nirvana because there really aren't a lot of solos. The standard way a song is constructed was kind of usurped, by them. But we're not going to do that. So that was a little different. Plus, they never tuned their fucking guitars very often either. So there was a lot of bashing going on there, which even the Sex Pistols were in tune, right? I mean, at least on record they were. Yeah. Right? So,
not so much live, I bet.
No, not live, no. But the point is, I just don't know, what was it about? What was grunge? What in your mind, that label of grunge, what is it?
Well, I don't think those bands got slapped with the label grunge.
Yeah.
Those bands didn't say, Nirvana's not sitting in an interview early on in their career saying, "We're a new kind of band. We're a grunge band." That was a construct of marketing people that just got slapped across all those bands.
Okay.
And so, I mean, I don't hold anything against those bands, and I think the word is kind of silly, especially basically I think it's just based on how they look. They weren't like hair metal guys. They wear shorts and combat boots and flannels.
Thing,
I think especially when you're buying grunge clothes at Sears in whatever year that was, it's definitely just a marketing thing and a fashion thing.
To me, I guess I didn't, as a music fan, like it because it was a wholesale change in the way it was being marketed and played on the radio. I get all that. But it wasn't really original in terms of image because it had happened 10, 12, 13, 14 years prior in the mid-70s with the quote-unquote real punk movement. Would you not agree? I mean, the whole... not tuning our instruments and dressing in ragged clothes. I don't and saying fuck you to society. I really don't know how that's any different than what Rotten and Vicious and Jones did.
Well, I don't think a lot of those bands were saying fuck you to society. Like when I think of Alice in Chains, what about Alice in Chains is saying fuck you to society? They're just like a weird, dreary heavy metal band. And Soundgarden is like a hybrid Black Sabbath band.
Yeah. And they all took the money.
As well they should. That's their job.
I'm not disagreeing with you, but I'm saying they weren't tear it all fucking down. That wasn't their mantra.
No, it never really was.
Right,
it never really was their mantra. It's a thing that kind of got associated with them. Probably most because of Nirvana. They're kind of the most punk rock version of those guys.
Agreed.
But Pearl Jam is just a really good bluesy rock band.
Right. Agreed.
But they all came from the same place, and we want to put labels on people, so let's call them grunge. They all came from Seattle. They're all grunge bands.
So the industry, the marketing people in the industry created that whole.
Yeah, that's how I see it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because I don't know. I listen to Alice in Chains now. They're just one badass heavy metal band to me.
Yeah.
And I feel the same way about Soundgarden. Some of the most heaviest.
I love
Chris
that band.
Cornell's vocals are just off the charts, right?
Out of this world.
Yeah, I got a story about that too.
Well, you have to lay it on me.
Yeah, I don't talk about it much. I got a little Chris Cornell story. It's ultra cool. But the Kim Thayil.
Yeah, that guitar player.
Yeah, he played Guild SG copies, I remember. And they were just, whatever, I don't know why I remember that, but they were the heaviest. His sound was the heaviest power riff I had ever heard in my life. I mean, it was like something I'd never heard before. I mean, heavier than Black Sabbath because of production values naturally at the time.
Sounds amazing.
Just their whole songwriting was just really great. They were a really good heavy band.
Yeah, and then throw Chris Cornell on top of those riffs, and the drummer Matt Cameron, he plays so cool to those weird riffs. They're so unique sounding, and then you just throw Chris Cornell on top of it. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's just so. To me though, I just didn't get the whole quote unquote term grunge. I didn't understand that. If grunge to me was what Nirvana may have done, but the other bands labeled, even Stone Temple Pilots, although they came from L.A.
Yeah, they get lumped in there, but they shouldn't
did,
be.
But what an amazing at their beginning, what amazing rock and roll band, and different from song to song.
Yeah.
I mean, and with Weiland being a chameleon, right?
Yeah, when I was in Sinistar and we were doing our record, part of that record we did down in Atlanta with Brendan O'Brien, who did like Soundgarden and all those bands.
Yep.
But we went and saw Stone Temple Pilots while we were doing that record down there, and I just remember thinking, like, oh yeah, we'll go see Stone Temple Pilots. Okay, cool, whatever. And then it's like every single song, I'm like, oh yeah, I know that song. It's a huge hit. The next song, oh yeah, I know that song. It's a huge hit. There was no songs that I didn't know, and I had never owned I'd never owned a Stone Temple Pilots record. I just didn't own any records. I didn't have any money before then, so. I just remember thinking, I know that song, and I know that song. Oh, yeah, that's a cool song, too. Fuck, I know every one of these songs.
I remember the 96, 97-ish when DirecTV would have, like, a monthly concert or something, and I was never paying that much attention to Stone Temple until they had Stone Temple Pilots live from Vegas. And I watched that thing from start to finish, this little club they were in, and every song was like, wow, I didn't know they sang that song. That every song was just a fucking hit. And Weiland coming out there and just nailing those vocals.
Yeah, and he's all weird and
he's like he was like a combination of
like
like Jagger and Morrison almost.
Yeah,
Morrison,
it's a good mashup, yeah.
But he came out with these black rubber latex gloves, these arm gloves and these goggles and a megaphone, you know.
Love it.
I never seen anything like that, and I'm like, holy shit! How the hell did I miss this band?
Yeah.
But from that moment on, they've been up there for me. They're a go-to for me. That second album's incredible.
It's funny you say that because at the time, talking about grunge, at the time when all those bands came out. Once again, my band just lost a record deal. I didn't have any money to go buy CDs. So I wasn't buying those CDs, and they were on MTV, and you would just see them on MTV.
Right.
And I was ambivalent about them. It's like, yeah, okay, cool. That's this new thing. I don't quite get it at the time. Now, though, like, I mean, it's like, how was I so blind at the time that how did I not see? Like, it took literally 15 years for me to go, Soundgarden is one of my favorite bands of all time now. How did I not get this at the time? What a dummy.
I think when it goes to Stone Temple, it's the DeLeo. It's certainly Weiland. But it's the DeLeo brothers, the bassists. They're in each other's head. There's something weird going on there because they're brothers, I think. But that the textures and a lot of that's production too. I mean, that's why the studio albums sound so amazing, right? It's the layering and
plus that bass player, he's channeling some John Paul Jones.
No
His
question.
bass playing,
You think?
He's got the coolest parts. He's not just playing do 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 do. He's just all over the place. They're so musical.
Yeah,
and that's really like if you take that bass player out of that band. They're going to be okay, but they're not going to be as cool. And that's one of the only times you're going to say, maybe Rush, but like you're going to say, if you take that bass player out, that band's not as good.
Yeah, I don't think it's Rush's interesting one for you to. We were talking off camera a little bit about Neil Peart and what a tragic loss there. But
yeah, it's really sad.
You can't take we were talking about Kiss off camera earlier and the personnel changes and so forth. Rush is one of those bands you can't replace any of those way guys. Yeah, it's impossible.
No way.
And there's a couple bands out there like that. Not many. That's a couple.
When I think of musicians and their impact, and I get this question a lot. Oh, do you think so and so is a good musician? Do you think these guys are good? Do you think that guy's a good drummer? And my point is always, like, is Ringo a good drummer? Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's an amazing drummer for the Beatles. And you wouldn't put Ringo in Rush, and you wouldn't put Neil Peart in the Beatles.
You'd be bored.
Yeah, but it just wouldn't sound right. Like that swingy, little soupy thing that Ringo does. So his thing is so integral to the band. Then yes, he's an amazing drummer. Charlie Watts is amazing drummer in the Rolling Stones. Mm-hmm. If you take him out, it doesn't sound like the Rolling Stones really.
Yeah.
And so. I've always thought that about musicians. What impact are they having on the music? And if you take them away, does it fall apart? Then they're really fucking good.
Okay, so let's ask you a couple of abstract questions then.
Lay it on me.
Should Zeppelin have continued with a new drummer?
No.
Are you saying that romantically to the whole legacy, or
no? Because even Jason Bonham, even his son,
not his dad.
Not his dad. He's good, for sure. I'm not going to take anything away from him. He's absolutely good. But he's not Bonham.
Yeah, okay. And you're a drummer. I respect your opinion wholeheartly.
And nobody is...
Cozy Powell could have stepped in there and done it.
I don't think so, and I love Cozy Powell. I've got an amazing Cozy Powell story. Don't let me forget an amazing Cozy Powell story.
I think he was a big enough hitter, a big thumper. And
he's a hitter, but he doesn't have that pocket. There's a pocket that Bonham has. Like, how many drummers in the world have tried to learn Fool in the Rain? They can play it, but it doesn't sound like Bonham. Yeah. It's the pocket, like... I
just think there was something missed. And Robert Plant ended up having a very admirable solo career. He did in the 80s, early 90s. And Jimmy did his thing in and out of different things, the firm. I get all that, but I think there was more music in those three. Especially, I feel like John Paul Jones could have held that together while they came out of the grieving process, and with another good drummer, drummer, they could have made some great music.
Okay, I'll give you that. There was definitely more music in them, for sure.
Okay.
I think that's a good point.
Listen to Plant's first solo album. Those tracks, Burning Down, that's Zeppelin. Can't you hear that? Because Robbie Blunt, the guitar player, is playing like Jimmy Page. It's Zeppelin.
Yeah, so... Maybe you're right, and maybe I am being romantic, as you said, but because what I'm thinking in my head is that no one is going to sound like Bonham except for Bonham, but maybe you put somebody else in there, and they're going to be a really good drummer. But yeah,
it'd be a little different. It'd be different.
Yeah, because nothing would sound like that. There's just
Right. Yeah. You can't emulate Bonham.
Now, I got two stories that I can't forget.
You okay.
Don't let me forget the Cozy Powell story. It's fucking fantastic. But
is it connected with Iommi?
No, but okay. it's a fantastic story.
Okay.
It's connected with Richie Blackmore.
Oh, right on.
So when I left being a performer and I started being an engineer and a producer, I was doing a record with a band that you've heard of. I will leave them nameless.
Fair enough.
And we're sitting at the bar, and like at a bar, just drinking, and I wasn't drinking. He was. But
famous last
words. Well, there was a time, but it's been a very long time.
Understood.
But he's not a very good drummer. He's in a band with a record deal. He's not a very good drummer.
There's probably a lot of those.
And he just launches into...
It isn't Bobby Rondinelli, is it?
No. It's not him, and I'm not going to mention who it is.
Fair enough.
But this guy says to me, he's having a couple drinks, and he goes, I don't know why everybody thinks that guy in Zeppelin is so good. I can play all those drum parts. And I'm just I'm making a record with the guy. I can't can't hit him over the head with a 50-pound hammer. Like, you're an idiot. I couldn't do that. So I was like, oh, okay,
right.
Wow, yeah, that's an opinion.
Right.
But okay, my Cozy Powell story.
Yeah.
So for anybody who doesn't know who Cozy Powell is, he was drummer, one of the first kind of like Bonham and Cozy Powell, like hard-hitting, solid drummers. They didn't care about playing tons of drum fills. They just held it together, real tough. He was one of my favorite drummers also. But how do I know this story? Because I was working with Andy Johns on a record,
okay,
and he told me the story.
Okay.
So this comes from Andy Johns. I'm repeating the Andy Johns story. So Richie Blackmore's Rainbow. Cozy Powell's the drummer of it. They're getting ready to do pre-production for a record. They're in England, and they're staying, of course, it's Richie Blackmore, in a castle.
Yeah.
And they're going to be practicing, and writing in this castle. It's the first day where everybody gets together, and they've got a new guy who's going to play with them. It's a keyboard player from America. So it's all these British guys and this American keyboard player. And apparently Cozy Powell has a wicked sense of humor. Like you'll hear a wicked. So he says, let's kind of like prank this keyboard guy. So he gets everybody involved in it, and they're in this castle, and he formulates this really elaborate prank to like kind of half haze, half prank this new guy, really kind of to test him to see if he can handle it.
Right.
Which I can totally understand
like
in a rock
hazing
band.
almost.
Like is he going to crack, or is he going to find this funny? So he's got this big thing going. They're in a castle at midnight. They've all got their watches synchronized. At midnight, one guy's going to pull the power, like the power of the whole building. It's going to go dark. Another guy is going to be standing outside the door. He's going to yell, "Ah!" like a ghost. Whoa! And then another guy's going to have a paint can on a rope from the window above, and he's going to swing the rope and break the window from the outside in.
Oh, great.
And then Cozy Powell has taken one of these heating elements that, like, I don't know what you're using for, but it's like, it goes up and down, and you put it on something and it makes it hot.
Right. He's
put it on the doorknob, so when the guy goes to grab the door, it's going to burn his hand.
Wow.
So the tick tock, 11:59 and 59 seconds, midnight, the lights go down, the guy screams, "Ah!" The window breaks open, the guy runs to the door, "Ah!" He totally burns his hand. And that was Cozy Powell thought that was just a funny prank.
Yeah, those British musicians, they're pranking band members or hazing them is legendary, and they don't have the same boundaries of decency that we do. I've read enough books to know.
Andy Johns told me a lot of funny prank stories. Yeah, and always with those British bands. Yeah, they were all, even like some Rod Stewart stories that were amazing. And
I have read Iommi's book, and Tony's always been a favorite of mine, and he, in there, makes no bones about it that he made a habit of just setting Bill Ward on fire whenever he possibly could.
Just because.
I mean, at one time they sent him to the hospital, burned his whole. I think they poured acetate, because back, I guess, in the 70s or the early 80s, there was acetate by the recording tapes, or the acetate fluid or something.
Maybe they would use it to clean the tapes or something.
The tape heads, maybe. Then he sprayed Bill down with this stuff and just set him ablaze, and didn't think nothing was going to really happen, and it just burned the hell out.
Oh, what a bummer! Because
Bill Ward just took the brunt of all that stuff, man.
Yeah, that sucks.
You said you worked with Iommi?
I did.
Can you got a story there?
Yeah, so when I left my band Sinistar, I had always told myself the band Sinistar I was in, which was the fourth band with a major record deal that I had been in, said, this is my last band. I'm not gonna be the old guy trying to be in another band to get a record deal. I'm gonna go into production. I'm gonna stay in my industry. I'm gonna go learn. I'm gonna be an engineer, and I'm gonna be a producer. And so in that context, early in that time period, I got to work on 2 Tony Iommi solo records. The producer on those records was Bob Marlette, but I came in to do work on them, engineering and all kinds of, and making cool sounds and all kinds of other stuff. And so, we got to hang out with Iommi. He wasn't there a lot, but I got to hang out with him. He was very, very nice and really, really a cool guy. And also one of the first things I did was 2 Alice Cooper records.
Okay.
So that was cool. Those are guys that I grew up loving, like, $1 Billion Babies from Alice Cooper. It's one of my favorite records. Still to this day I can listen to it. The production doesn't hold up, but it's so cool. And so to get to work with Alice was really cool. And he's once again, he's all the guys who've been around a long time, they're all really cool. Like Halford was the nicest guy.
That's
he was so humble. And what was really interesting, but I learned a lot from him, just witnessing, this is what it looks like to be like revered by your fans and to not have an attitude.
Yeah.
He was so humble with everybody he met. He would give everybody the time of day. When people wanted him to sign posters after the gig, he would wait till the last person was there. He would wait as long as it took. He would engage in conversations. He would remember people. Like he maybe, you know, like this guy, he's a super fan. I've signed this guy's posters 5 times in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
And he would recognize the guy. Maybe he doesn't know his name, but he remembers him. And he would just be really engaging and very thoughtful. And he was like that with everybody. Like if you go to Subway to get a sandwich, he's engaging with the guy at Subway. There's never a conversation with him that's like, hey, how's it going? Pretty good. You know, just like, you know, step 1, 2, 3, 4 for a pointless conversation.
Right.
He was always engaging and is always
he was genuine.
He's very genuine, and he's got a wicked sense of humor, and he's really funny.
He's a British guy.
Yeah, yeah. So,
are you a Who fan?
Kind of. I think Keith Moon's fantastic.
That's what I was going to ask you about Keith Moon.
Okay, there's a band. I was thinking about it while you were talking about Zeppelin. They bring in Kenny Jones to replace Keith Moon.
Right.
It's like, what?
Now, that's fascinating you said that, because I wanted to tell you, I just throughout the quarantine, right, I just completed Roger Daltrey's autobiography.
Uh-huh.
And then, because I really like Roger. And then I said, you know what, I'm not a big fan of Townsend for a lot of reasons, but I'm going to dive into his book. And it's so interesting.
I bet it is, yeah.
To see, and Roger's read not deep enough, and Pete's is just too deep. It's too much information. But it's interesting to see how that decision to get Kenny Jones, that was Townsend's insistence, and Daltrey didn't want Kenny Jones for the reason that you just insinuated. That's not, there was no groove to him. He was almost like he's a small faces, right?
Yeah,
Faces drummer. He was like a metronome, but it wasn't. He never got into the pocket, never got into the groove of the songs, and they were used to hearing Moon back there for all those years, and to play with someone, it was something was lacking.
Yeah, I can't imagine what it. I never saw that version of the Who. I never saw the Who in general at all, but I can't imagine going to see the Who and Kenny Jones playing like, you know, Bob O'Reilly or something, you know, all those just bombastic drum parts that Keith Moon was playing. I can't imagine like how flat that must have fell. Mm-hmm. At least that's what it seems like to me. Maybe it worked, but it just, you know, he's not the same drummer. But maybe that's why. Because no one's going to replace Keith Moon. Let's go the total opposite direction and do something completely different, because anybody that we try to get that's going to be like him is going to be a letdown. Maybe that was the thought process. I don't know.
I think from reading the book, too, I think Townsend wanted to go that direction because he obviously was friends with Jones. But I guess the last couple years with Keith Moon were just fucking horrible because he was so inconsistent and so, you know, not doing his job regularly up to snuff.
Yeah.
And they kind of went the other direction. Like, I want to play with someone who's reliable. It might not be the same thing, but I know it's going to be powerful and straight ahead.
Yeah.
But it was sterile. It was vanilla.
The gig's not going to fall apart in the middle of it.
I'll tell you what, it was such good reads about what some of these bands had to endure in the 60s and the 70s, and just the amount of drug use. And you don't know whether it's being exaggerated, because you think, how could they have ingested so many drugs and still be able to function?
I'll bet you money it's not exaggerated, because like I know my previous lifestyle, you know, it was really, I'm for sure lucky to be having this conversation with you, because I was out of my mind.
Yeah, mid-'80s in Los Angeles on the strip.
Yeah, I mean, people dropping, a lot of people dying of heroin overdoses, and so I bet it's right. You know, I hear people like talking about Guns N' Roses books and stuff like, I heard a story on that Guns N' Roses book. It doesn't even sound real. And they'll tell me the story. I'm like, yeah, that's totally real. Literally, I was there. I saw that happen. And so, you know, these stories that people don't believe are true, at least in the context of that, like, yeah, I was there. I saw that. That's
Let me throw a couple other professional drummers out in some big bands. I want to get your thoughts on them, and then I want to talk a little bit about production, how that's changed over the years, going from analog to digital. I have some questions for you.
Yeah.
Eric Singer.
I'm not that familiar with Eric. You know, I know that he plays, you know, in Kiss, but I didn't really ever hear him what he does there, so I'm going to have to pass because I don't know enough.
Yeah, I think he's played with, believe it or not, Alice Cooper.
Yeah,
he's played with
a
Black
lot
Sabbath.
of them. Yeah,
or some incarnation of Black Sabbath at some point in time. But he's definitely kind of run the gambit.
He seems really good. I mean, he's clearly good. He's in the game. He's still in the game. He's got to be a good drummer.
I think he's I think Gary Moore. He played with Gary Moore for a period of time in the '80s too. And Gary was no slouch as a musician.
No, he wasn't. I have some of those old Gary Moore records. He
probably surrounded himself with some good folks.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about Peart and what his music and his style means to you as a drummer.
Well, originally I was really into Kiss. I was the crazy Kiss kid in my school. You know, like I told you a story off camera about painting my face like Peter Criss in a pantomime skit I had to do in front of my whole school. If you're ever going to do pantomime, don't paint your face like Peter Criss. It doesn't work. But I was that weird kid. I was so into it. That was first.
Okay.
And then I got into Zeppelin.
Right.
And so then like Bonham and just those big beats and those pockets and those kind of cool ways he plays beats. And then I kind of fell into Rush 2112.
Yeah.
And then that was my first introduction to like being a progressive and not just holding down the pocket.
Did you like it?
I thought it was fantastic. I had my little 5-piece drum set, and I play all those drum fills on my little 5-piece drum set, and and I loved it. And then what I really liked about it is I got a little older, and I kind of aged. I felt like I was aging out of my Kiss fandom, and I'm like a total science fiction nerd. So when I was a kid, I was I was the mad Kiss goon and the mad Star Trek goon.
Yeah, right on.
So like they would write songs about outer space and and black holes and
Cygnus X1 and 2.
Yeah, totally. And I could listen to those with headphones on and just literally take a journey. And like I said, I didn't have any friends. I didn't have any siblings. My mom was paying no attention to me, so I had to entertain myself. And those
You're the perfect Rush fan.
I would totally. And so I could just listen to those records and go on a spaceship journey and really feel it and see it in my head. Yeah. It meant so much to me. It really meant a lot to me. And then,
so you're probably. Let me ask you this: when just hypothetically, so you dig them in the '70s, right? And we're the same age. So when Tom Sawyer came out and they became commercially successful,
I loved it. I was so happy for him.
Yeah, I wasn't. I was a little jacked because the people that thought I was out of my mind listening to that shit 5 years prior, now all of a sudden they love them. You know what I mean? Like, hey, fuck you. Are you kidding me?
That is a thing that happens for bands. Like you want more people to hear the band you like because you really like them, but then when too many people hear them, you're like, "Fuck!" Now it's not
special.
No, it's not my special thing anymore. It's not like I'm not the only kid who knows it. Now everybody knows it.
But the stuff was so good though that I didn't feel that way for long. When I really listened to Moving Pictures in its entirety, it was like, wow, what a masterpiece.
Yeah, so I was happy for him, and I'm always happy for bands that break out, like even like Nirvana and Pearl Jam. Yeah. If they blew up the scene that I was in L.A., in that time period, if they were the atom bomb that blew it up, well, it needed to get blown up, and more power to them. They did it, and they're if Kurt Cobain had still been alive, he'd probably still be playing music. Pearl Jam is. Soundgarden was until Chris Cornell, Pat and Alice in Chains. They're still around, and I'm happy for those guys. That's really cool.
What about Bill Ward? Your thoughts on Bill Ward? Black Sabbath drummer.
Oh, I totally. I'm trying to
figure for audience. That's why
I'm trying to figure out how to explain what I think about Bill Ward. He almost sounds like he doesn't know how to play. But I love it because it sounds like a guy like on those first Sabbath records. Yeah. Clearly later he can play. He's not bad. But those early records, it sounds like a guy he doesn't know how to formulate a very good drum fill, and he's just playing the craziest stuff. But it's so cool. He's just going for it. And I think it's Fairies Wear Boots. There's like a little drum solo in it. And he's like hitting the rim. You can hear the click, click, click. He's almost train wrecking it. But I'm like, that's so great that he's just going for it. He's not playing it safe. He is just letting it rip. And so I think he's awesome.
Sometimes I think he's playing behind the beat on that early stuff. And then sometimes I think he's pushing. It's almost like he's rushing through some stuff too. And in that Iommi book, he just said, we just kind of left stuff in there because, and Bill could never play the same thing twice, he said. Ward could never play because, and even in the 97 through that tour they were all together, the quote-unquote reunion tour, 97, 98, 99, 2000, that run, they were like, never knew what Ward was going to play that night. It was always something different. Couldn't play the same thing twice, man.
That just made me think of another Iommi story.
Okay.
And it was prior to getting a chance to work on records for him. When I was in Rob Halford's band, the second show we ever did was in Irving Plaza in Manhattan in New York.
Right.
And Iommi was going to come up and play with us on our encore. So we learned 3 Sabbath songs, Paranoid and a couple other ones. And so we learned all these Sabbath songs, and I was like, oh, this is going to be amazing. I'm going to be jamming with Halford and Tony Iommi, in a gig for real. And then in the 11th hour, his grandmother got sick, and so he didn't come. But I just remember nobody knew anything about that band yet, so they didn't know who the members were, what to expect. And we had already done one gig in Los Angeles at the Roxy, just kind of like, let's give it a shot. And it went really well. And so we go to the Irving Plaza gig, and I see like all these like kind of like old school like dudes from Jersey, metal dudes with like Black Sabbath t-shirts on. I'm like, oh, those guys are going to be so let down. No Iommi tonight.
Hardcore.
Fuck, they're going to be so bummed. And so we launched into our set, and the same set that had worked so good in L.A. and and it's Halford, so the lights go down and the crowd's like, yeah. They love him, and we get done with the first song and the crowd's like, yeah, and then we get done with the second song and the crowd's like, and it's not what they're not expecting what's coming at him. It's not Judas Priest, it's not his other band Fight, it's different, it's experimental. So first song, yeah. Second song, yeah. Third song, yeah. Fourth song, booze.
What the fuck is this?
Fourth song, they're booing. And by the fifth song, they literally, after every song, the crowd is just yelling, bullshit. I had dealt with gigs like that when I was very young. I was in a band that, when I was in high school, I was on TV. I had videos on TV, and we get to open up for all the national bands. And so a couple times in when I was in high school, getting, just roughed up by the crowd. So I knew to just power through it.
Yeah.
But, the crowd was so not having it in New York.
Wow, I bet.
And Halford just turned around and looked at me with this kind of glazed look, like he had never experienced a rough gig like that. Where he's Rob Halford.
Yeah.
There's his fans. They're booing at him. They're yelling bullshit.
Is it because the music was so just different?
It was totally different, and they would, they just didn't. Had they known that that's what they were going to come and see, they would, people would have known that's what they're going to come and see.
It's hard for any established artist to make a musical change,
especially someone who's so iconic as Rob Halford and his legacy there, and now Lee back in Priest, and he's more beloved, and his legacy is even bigger now than it ever was.
In that book, Iommi also mentioned the story that apparently in the early 90s, I think it was, where Black Sabbath was out on an Ozfest, I think, and they performing as Black Sabbath, and Ozzy got sick or he missed a plane, didn't show one night or couldn't show one night, and Halford stepped in like that and played the entire Sabbath set as the singer. And I guess there's videos of that out there.
I've heard about that. Yeah, I've heard about that.
Yeah, that was and it turned to be quite a success. Okay, let's talk about recording for a second.
Lay it on me.
All right, so we'll get a little nitnoity here, so I hope we don't lose anybody. But
we'll try to make it fun.
Yeah, we'll try to make it fun. And with you, I'm sure we will. So right around, I want to say, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I might get the dates wrong, but right around the mid-'80s or so, when, or the early 80s, when CDs became a thing, let's say by 80... I think the first CD player was 81 or 83. By the time it was mainstream, it was 86, maybe 87, where CDs became a thing. Mm-hmm. I started just reading about production, and you started to see these 3 letters would start appearing on every CD. It'd be AAA, AAD, ADD, or DDD. And I through just curiosity.
Yeah, please tell me. I don't know what that is.
But out of complete curiosity, with no internet, I was able to find and through the library. I wanted to know what the hell this meant. And what it had to do was analog recorded, analog mixed, analog mastered. That would be an AAA. And
that makes sense. Okay.
Because digital was starting to be a thing, right?
Yeah.
Why did the early CDs sound so shitty? Like the first generation CDs were just, do you remember those?
Yeah, they sounded shitty. And
was it oversampling or lack of oversampling rates? Or
I don't know why. It was a new technology. They hadn't got it right yet. And,
okay. Well, they seem to be like toward the late 80s. More of these started saying ADD, and then some of them, like by 90, were going DD. So it was digital in, digital engineering, digital output. And you mentioned before about like great sounding recordings. I was listening to one of your other guest appearances on a podcast, and you were talking about, it just drives you nuts when, the quality, you're a quality nut. I love that about you.
Well,
yeah, on the production end, right?
Yeah, it drives everybody crazy.
Well, I remember buying the Rush Presto album in 1990, and it was a DDD recording, and I didn't notice it was a DDD recording until I put the CD in, and they just came in with full bluntal. The first song, Show Don't Tell, and my stereo speakers almost exploded. It was louder than anything I had seen or heard, and I'm like, holy shit! And the space between the notes was silent. There wasn't any tape hiss. There wasn't any noise. It was vacant. It was empty. It was like being in a vacuum between the space between the notes, and I knew something was going on.
Yeah.
Like, do you remember when digital became prevalent? Does this make any sense to you?
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally remember. It was when I was when it really, really took over, and where analog tape was almost just never used again. It wasn't really until about the early 2000s.
Okay.
Like all the way through the 90s, there was a
DAT, right? Digital analog tape.
Well, not even that. I mean, there was some people were recording analog. Some people were recording on this new thing called Pro Tools.
Okay.
And, the Pro Tools allowed you to do some editing. It was clunky at the time. It's amazing now, but it sounds fantastic now. But it wasn't until probably, early 2000s that there was analog tape. Recording to analog tape was so it didn't happen anymore. Occasionally it happens still by like purists and awesome
Neil
for them.
Young, people like that.
Yeah, Jack White, some jazz people are going to track to tape, but it's almost ubiquitous. Everyone's tracking into digital, into Pro Tools.
Right.
But the shift was so thorough almost that in 2000 I remember, or 2002 I remember, there was like this rumor amongst other engineers and producers that some other big producer had literally went to the vaults of like Ampex, the people who made the 2-inch analog tape, and bought all the analog tape in the world that was left, and they weren't manufacturing anymore, and like one guy owned it all.
Was that done because to look into the future that would be valuable someday, or they were forcing people to not use that anymore?
No, it was that producer said, I'm not on board with digital. I want to be able to track on analog, and there's only a limited amount left in the world.
Got it.
They make it again now, but at that time, it was almost like rock is dead. Like Nirvana's here, rock is dead.
Yeah, right.
It was like analog is dead. It's all digital.
Okay.
And so he literally was just scooping it up so he could have it. Because otherwise, he was thinking, and we were all thinking, they're literally never going to make analog tape again. 24-inch 2-track tape.
Yeah.
Or 2-inch 24-track tape. Yeah, they're never going to make it again. And now they do, of course. But that was kind of that was really right around 2000, 2001 too. That's right where I landed in the beginning of my production career was in 2002.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that. So what drove you, what compelled you to go that route in the business?
Okay, so my entire career I've been a performer, and at some point I knew, not everyone's in you too. You know, you don't get to play.
You don't say.
You don't get to be in your band forever. At some point, you're not in your band anymore.
Right.
And like I said, I had joined that band Sinistar, signed a really big record deal with Geffen, and I said that like, this will be my last band. Hopefully it lasts a very long time, but this will be my last band. And you know, I don't want to be trying to start a new band, you know, in my 40s and trying to get a record deal. It was so hard to make money even then. You know, I wasn't going to try as a grown man with a mortgage and child support payments to try to navigate that world. So I said, this will be my last band. And I thought, well, I want to stay in my industry, in the music industry. I can be a manager. That's what I know what they do. I've seen it a lot. I know what they do.
Right.
And I thought, well, I don't really, you know, manager guys. It's just really not my bag. I'm not. Or I could go work at a record label. I could be an A&R guy. I could go find bands and help them, you know, help develop the bands and get them record deals and walk them through the process. And, you know, that may be kind of cool, finding new bands. But then I thought, yeah, but the labels, there's always an adversarial relationship between the band and the label. You know, they're kind of the enemy, the labels. Then I thought, well, I could be a producer and work in the studio with the bands, being creative and sit in the room while, you know, these things that are going to live forever are being recorded. Like, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. That sounds awesome.
Okay.
And so that's why I chose that, as opposed to staying in my industry and being a manager, staying in my industry and being an A&R guy or starting an imprint label or something.
Right.
So I'm gonna go be in the room with the band. You know, I know musicians. That's my world.
So that was a bit more of a practical decision.
And it's the one that just resonated the best with me.
Okay.
But I didn't know a whole lot. I didn't come into production with a 20 or 30 year career of making records before me.
Right.
So I did what I always do when I need to learn something really fast. Well, first off, I spent all the time that I was in Halford learning how to do programming and, you know, electronic music.
Right.
Then when I was in Sinistar, I spent all that time, you know, learning how to do recording. So and formulating relationships with different producers and different engineers, and you know, and you know, getting in relationship, because so much of the music industry is relationship. Sure. So I was learning as much as I could the whole time. You know, we'd be on tour. I'd be practicing, you know, mixing stuff, and you know, and then finally when I left, I knew enough to be in the game.
Okay.
And so I called some producers, said, hey, I left Sinistar. I want to come work with you. You know, and I was only down about a month before I had an opportunity to be on a record. Yeah. And I was in the seat. I was in the hot seat, you know, at the time. The first thing I did was, in that capacity, was basically just being a Pro Tools engineer.
Right.
And I didn't know Pro Tools. I knew another program. So like on the clock for a major label deal, I had to learn Pro Tools on the fly and make it work. And I did. You know, I did what I always do. I just call my peers who know how to do it. What are the 5 things I need to know? Yeah. I need to know them today because I have to do them tomorrow. And then I would just like be in the fire and figure it out, and, you know, don't look hectic. And then, you know, the next day I would call, okay, I got those 5 things. And what are the next 5 things I need to know? And I just learn in the ring. And I think that's one of the best ways to learn shit that matters, is you just jump in the middle of it. You're going to sink or swim, and most people will figure it out.
Sure,
because you have to. You don't have a choice.
Absolutely right. And what better way to learn?
Totally. What better way to learn and get paid and make and do the thing I wanted to do anyway. And so I just spent all the time at the beginning when I was, you know, shifted over to being an engineer, just learning as much as I could, asking as many questions as I could, and that's how I got my chops. And I got my chops, you know, in the seat in our big record where it mattered. Okay.
For the folks watching this, clarify a couple terms.
Sure.
What's the difference between a producer, a mixer, and an editor when it comes to a recording?
Well,
those
you left
terms.
You left engineer out of that.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Not editor, engineer. Forget editor. Editors, that's literature.
But it's actually, there's a Pro Tools editor in music now.
All right.
But think of producer in music, like director in a film.
Okay.
He's the person who's going to oversee the whole thing. He's going to work with the talent to get the best performances out of them. He's going to work with them on their songwriting. Okay. Just like a director might work on the storyline. He's going to try to get better performances out of the actors. Producer is the person who's overseeing the entire thing. Mm-hmm. He may be the engineer as well, but he might not be. But he's the one in charge of delivering the record when it's done, and it's going to be to a caliber that producer makes records at. Okay. And he's going to be very involved in songwriting, if necessary, in coaxing performances and helping with lyrics in any capacity that needs to make that record better. And then there's an engineer. The engineer is the guy who sets up all the mics and chooses all, the mic pre's to use and turns the EQs and the compressors and makes the sound that you hear. He's the guy responsible for choosing the tones that get recorded. Okay. And then a mixer is the guy who takes all that recorded material. You've got maybe 100 tracks of stuff. Right. Kick drum, bass guitar, vocal 1, vocal 20, acoustic guitar, electric guitar. You got to blend it all together and make it sound like something that matters. And those guys are really, there's that. So they mix the finished product. And then there's a mastering guy at the end. You've got you've mixed it.
That's analog to digital, right? The mastering of it?
Well, it depends. Sometimes they master digitally. Sometimes they master, analog. It just depends. And so that's kind of what it is. The producer oversees it. The engineer is like the director of photography. Okay. So like the guy who's choosing the shots and he knows the right camera to use put this lens on it, and if we put that light there, it's going to make it look a certain way. That's what the engineer does in music. Okay.
All right. So, but those can overlap, right? And if obviously
they totally can,
you're a young band and you don't have a lot of money to spend, your producer, engineer, and mixer may be one person.
He might be this. He might very well might be the same guy. Yeah.
And you, where do you find? How do I say this? In today's era, you're working with a lot of young acts. You're working with established acts. What is your main role? Are you a producer? Are you a mixer? Are you?
It depends on the project. My studio that I have now is not my bread and butter. So I'm able to just take on projects that I like. And so sometimes I'm the producer and the engineer. Sometimes I'm just the engineer. Like where we did the Winner's Descent drums and heavy rhythm guitars at my place, and I was just the engineer. Okay. They already had a producer that they were working with, but we had all met. And they said, "Man, can we come track at your studio?" And I'm like, "Well, you guys are super cool people. I love you. Yeah, come and track at my studio, and I'll do the thing I do. I'll get your tones sounding killer on your drums and your bass and your guitars. I'll help put all that together. Okay. And then and then your producer can just oversee the whole thing. And but other times I am the producer and the mixer and the engineer.
So you can do them all.
I can do them all.
What do you prefer?
My favorite thing of all is engineering and producing and tracking drums, of course. Okay. Because it's the thing I know so inside and out. Like on the Winner's Descent, for instance, they brought in a fellow named Nick to play drums, and he's a very competent drummer. So like I would hear him playing a part, and I would like get all excited, like a little kid, like, "Hey, ooh, that's so cool! Try that thing you just did, but try to add a little thing here, then go over there and do that thing." And then he would like play it, and I'm like, "Yeah, awesome!" Then I'd go back in, and I'd come running back. "Oh wait, I got another idea!" and I'm like a kid, like a crazy kid, so super duper excited.
But that's your thing, though. Yeah, that's in you,
and I can hear it. So I can hear like the whole thing so well. Right. I love that. It's so much fun.
Would you say technology today in 2020 is so good that the argument digital versus analog for purity anymore is no longer even relevant? And maybe it hasn't been relevant for a long time.
Yes and no. Okay. Mainly yes. I think it's irrelevant. But I know what some people will do is they will track drums to 2-inch tape so they can get the tape compression, and then they will dump that 2-inch tape into Pro Tools, and they'll do the rest of the record in Pro Tools. And we've done that before when I was making records. We did a record for a band called Airborne from Australia, and we did that. We tracked the drums to tape, and then everything else just in Tools.
Let me throw a couple famous producers out there, and even if I'm not looking for stories, I want your opinion on them, or your opinion of their importance to that act.
Oh, okay.
Okay, Terry Brown with Rush.
Well, anything Rush does, I love. So clearly, he's doing great.
But I think he. They said George Martin was the sixth Beatle or the fifth Beatle, right?
Yeah.
Terry Martin was definitely Terry Brown was definitely to me the fourth member of Rush, and I think they parted ways with him like in the early '80s or something. But I mean, I don't think he gets any credit. I mean, his fingerprints are all over that early Rush sound, I think.
Well, he should get more credit for sure.
I think so.
Yeah.
What about what about Ted Templeton?
Ted Templeman? He's fantastic. Yeah. What a legacy that guy's got. And what he does good, he's a great engineer too. So
okay.
But what he does good is the same thing that I think Rick Rubin does really good. That's
my next guy I was going to ask you about.
Yeah. Is that he brings the best of the band that is sitting in front of him. Okay. He brings the best of that band out. He doesn't try to make that band be another band.
Okay.
Like he doesn't go in and say, oh, play it like this and do that thing like that, and, with some other band in mind. He says, oh, he looks at him. The thing you guys do really good is you do this thing there, and you're really good at that, and let's do more of that and less of that thing that's not so good. But he's not trying to craft the band into what they're not.
Okay.
He's trying to extract the best thing that they already are. And I think that's what Rick Rubin does too. That's why he can work from hip hop to Johnny Cash to Slayer to System of a Down to he's just getting the best to Chili Peppers, whatever his discography is out of this world.
Right. He's a strange guy too.
I think he's pretty cool and interesting.
Yeah, I'm sure he probably is.
Yeah.
Just what he puts off is just out there. It's out there.
He's a guy typically that's mainly just a producer, and he'll hire an engineer. I've worked with some engineers that came from the Rick Rubin camp.
Okay.
And he's sometimes, depending on the record, sometimes he's just not even really there very much.
Right on.
And it's not a bad thing. Like when I say that, some people might think, wow, he's getting paid and he's not even there. Mm-hmm. What he's getting paid for is to deliver a Rick Rubin quality record to the label.
Got it.
That's his job. His job is nothing other than that. And so whatever he needs to do, get in the way, not be in the way, if him being in the room is going to hinder that process, then he's not going to be there.
Got it.
He'll be really involved in pre-production. His engineer will literally make the record, and he'll be there partially in some cases. Sometimes he's there all the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, so he's a great example of how it can just be so many different things to be a music producer.
I think he did Black Sabbath's album from 5 or 6 years ago.
He might have.
I'm pretty sure, because I think there were some interesting interactions between him and the band. But he, like you said, he's done everything. That has to be the sign of a great producer, right? If it's multi-demographic. Sure.
Like for me, admittedly, I'm relatively, I hate to say it, but a relatively one-trick pony. Like, I know hard rock bands. Mm-hmm. That's the thing. That's what I was always in. That's the thing I understand.
Right.
That's the thing I like to do. Mm-hmm. I loved listening to heavy guitars. I really just like it. That's the thing I want to do. I've done things that aren't exactly that, and it's a little bit of a stretch. And you're like, oh, this is a little out of my wheelhouse.
And if you don't enjoy it, I mean, it's important, I think, in this world it's just important to do something well, but also to understand what you don't like. And if all possible, stay away from it.
Yeah.
I mean, why spend time doing something you really don't care for?
Yeah.
What about Bob Ezran?
He's great. I've had a chance to work with him on a couple things. I think Bob Ezran was the executive producer on the 2 Alice Cooper records I did.
Okay.
Bob Marlette was the producer, and I think Bob Ezran was the executive producer.
If someone's an executive producer, that means they're just putting their 2 cents in. Like they're They're putting their umbrella over the whole thing. They're just another set of ears in there, but because of the prominence of their persona and what they've done.
Yeah, in the context of those records, that's really how it felt. Bob Marlette was he was the guy.
Right.
And Bob Ezran would be overseeing, and he would be there a couple times.
Yeah.
And he's a very nice guy. I really enjoyed talking to him and hanging out with him.
Yeah.
And plus, his legacy of one of my favorite bands was oh, that's the guy.
But he's done, but I mean, besides Kiss, though, I think in Alice Cooper.
Cooper, yeah. $1 billion Babies.
But I think, though, didn't he also do a Floyd album?
He might have.
I might be wrong on that, but I
don't know his whole discography, but I know him, and I know the things that I know that I love so much.
Yeah. What about Mutt Lange and his importance to AC/DC?
Oh, is there any producer who's had more of an impact on a band, or Def Leppard? His impact on Def Leppard.
Right, exactly right.
Yeah. Incredible.
I mean, he's and he married well too. At least initially he did. I don't know.
Temporarily.
I don't know how that worked out in the end.
I heard a lot of crazy stories about like Back in Black, how they made Back in Black. I've heard stories where, they recorded all the guitar parts of one string at a time.
Yeah, I heard that too.
And I don't know if that's true or not. But
I can't imagine it would be though.
But I know myself, I have torn things down really, really to that level to get a thing right.
Wow.
And just because the sound, it sounds a certain way. And I wouldn't be surprised. Like I've tracked records where the drummer is only playing the kick and snare and he's playing dummy cymbals, and then we're later going to go in and overdub the cymbals. But he's playing the thing, so the vibe is there, but we're getting just the kick and the snare. There's no bleed of anything else. And then we go in and play just the hi-hat, and he's still playing a whole drum set, but you can't hear the other drums.
Got it.
We're only miking the hi-hat, and then just the toms. And
that's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. But it's a thing. You can do that. And so the single string guitar, maybe. I've never did it, but not that hard.
They're great, So talk a little bit about the space between the notes, and can you maybe articulate that, because it's hard for the average music listener to understand that concept, but it's so bloody important. And the song Black and Black is the most obvious example of the importance of the space between the notes, correct?
Yeah, that riff, dun, 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 it's mainly space. And just the restraint. The
restraint
that those songs that Angus and Malcolm showed in writing that riff,
right?
And it culminates with that rad little pull off riff, dun 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 dun, like it's so cool, and that is all the open space between there, and it's great.
As a producer, how much attention do you pay to that, and would you say that younger artists, because of the impulsive nature of someone doing it maybe their first or second time, they may have a hard time grasping that concept?
I don't know that they have a hard time grasping it. I just don't think they think to write like it.
Got it.
Because they're trying to fill up space, and they want to play a lot of stuff, and they're playing a lot of stuff, which sometimes sounds great when there's just a lot of stuff there. It's cool, but I think it's hard. It's just hard to write like that. It's hard to think, look, I need to play I want my song, like I'm in AC/DC. I need it to be this big thing.
Yeah.
I need to play big, but that's not big at all.
Right. What always puzzled me was those early Zeppelin records. Jimmy Page was always lauded for his engineering abilities and multi-track layering of like guitar parts and so forth, which made that Zeppelin sound. I get all that. But the original vinyl albums, all the way through Physical Graffiti, I would say they just sounded like ass. And I don't know. So the original recording of it was so poorly done for such a monumental group. And I know Page has gone back and remastered everything. I get it. But did you notice any other bands of that era just having really bad recordings?
I think a lot of bands from that era they sounded great and fine at that time period because that was the standard. But now production has gotten so good. We're holding them up against the kind of records you can make now, and they don't some of them don't hold up. The performances totally hold up.
Right.
You say that's an amazing drum part. That's a fantastic guitar riff. And I like the way he's interplaying those two guitars and plants vocals on top. But yeah, they don't particularly sound all that great, but those performances carry it. There's an old joke that we used to always say, oh, like when you're laboring over a sound or something, and you always, like a guy's hitting a snare drum. Let's get a snare tone. Hit the snare. Bang, bang, bang. You're there for like 2 hours. You're just losing your mind. And the joke is, well, how do you fix a bad snare tone? And then like, hit song. Just write a hit song. No one will care about that bad snare tone.
That's a good point.
Just write a hit song. Who cares?
Even like the first 3 Kiss records just sound like they're underwater, like Hotter Than Hell. When I listen to that album, it's just, even as a kid, I can notice as a young kid listening to that going, this just does not sound good.
There was a lot of records that I remember thinking stuff like that, but I was so 100% into music when I was a kid. I gave everybody a wide berth. Any band, like I wanted to love all bands. Mm-hmm. And so even like I might notice for a moment, doesn't sound very good, but who cares? It's a rock band. I love it.
Yeah.
I don't care.
That critical. Right.
This is my magic time. It's music. Oh.
What amazes me though is you take that Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon record in '73
and Wish You Were Here.
They
both sound amazing.
The sound quality on vinyl from the original pressing is still un-effing believable.
Yeah.
Like, so you have that, and then you have, the Stones' Exile on Main Street, which is a phenomenal record in its entirety.
Yeah.
But the quality of the recording, I don't know. It was hit or miss, I think, regardless of how legendary the acts were and how some of that music, like when you listen to a song by the Stones, like "GimMe Shelter" is like one of the most iconic Stones songs. Ask anybody.
Yeah.
The original recording of that on vinyl and even the remastered versions, it's horrible. I think even one part clips or something when they come in with the harmonica. It clips and they leave it in. I mean, like it's just so bad. I mean, you almost wish that they'd re-record the damn thing. And you can't, of course, but, it just drives me nuts.
Speaking of the Stones, when I was in my production career, we would work a lot of times at a studio called Henson in Hollywood. It was the former A&M Records.
Okay.
Like We Are the World and all that stuff.
Yeah, there was no relation to Jim Henson, was it?
Yeah, it's the Henson Puppet Group bought A&M Records.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and so we would work there a lot, made a ton of records there. And one time we were mixing a record in the Henson Mix Room, one of the 5 studios that were in this big building.
Okay.
And the Stones were right across the hall from us.
Wow.
And so, like I would walk out and like their door was, like 6 feet away from our door. So you could open your door and you could hear the Stones tracking their record.
That's crazy.
It's like, that's fucking Rolling Stones. and we would bump into Mick Jagger in the hallway.
It's amazing.
And then there's Ron Wood. Now I'm talking to Ron Wood and I'm talking to Mick Jagger.
Right.
And the whole time I'm like, man, I want to have a Keith Richards sighting. And I did finally. I didn't talk to him, but he kind of breezed past me. I'm like, oh, it's Keith Richards. Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah. And so when I look back at that time that I was making records, the fact that was my world that I got to live in,
it's incredible.
It was so cool. I don't take it for granted for a second, and I didn't then either. I just thought, man, this is so amazing. I'm literally, I get to do things that no one else gets to do. People that I would have dreamt of doing when I was a kid. Like, if you would have told 14-year-old Sid, who was listening to British Steel, smoking weed, listening to Judas Priest, that later in life you're going to play in a band with that guy, I would have went, "Whoa, you're out of your mind."
Yeah, I get it. I totally get it, man. Listen to Judas Priest and smoking weed.
Yeah,
that's the name of a book.
Yeah, or if like when my band blew up, in my band got dropped because of Nirvana, blowing everything up. If you would have said, "Hey, down the road you're going to produce a record and Dave Grohl's going to play drums on it,"
how insane is that?
I'd be like, "What? Huh? That doesn't even compute." But all those things happened.
Yeah, and that's a story of life, Yeah. And you were fortunate enough to take advantage of circumstances that came before you.
Yeah. Speaking of Dave Grohl, what a super cool guy. I produced my production partner and I, Dylan McLaren and I, we produced a record for the actress Juliette Lewis. She's got a band, Juliette Lewis and the Licks, and they're a really good.
Did not know that.
They're like a good rock band. It's like she's like Iggy Pop meets Peaches, just like
Okay.
it's fucking. She's good, and so we did the Four on the Floor record, and Dave Grohl played drums on all that record.
Right.
And so I got to watch him, and he blew me away. First off, I always thought he was a good drummer anyway, but he came into the studio and he didn't know the songs. He wasn't supposed to. So he just said, just teach me the songs in the studio. I'll write my drum parts on the fly. And so the band was all set up. He was going to play with the band. They like show him the chords, and he played it once. He remembers it. Like he's not even writing it down. He's like,
I believe it.
I got it. Okay, let's go through it. And we're tracking everything, so we just have it. And he, right out of the gate, he's never even heard the song before. He's got a rad Dave Grohl drum part. He's just playing right out, and then we play it a second time, and it's a little tighter, and he's refined it a little bit.
Yeah.
By the third pass, he's got a kick-ass, super hooky, badass Dave Grohl drum part.
Got it.
In like 3 takes after never hearing a song, and he did an entire record like that. Every song sounded different. Every song had its own Dave Grohl hook. They weren't the same hook from another Dave Grohl song or from a Foo Fighters. He's so creative.
Yeah.
And I got to watch it, it's another one of those times I'm like, I just witnessed that. That is amazing. But there's a Dave Grohl story that I tell some of my friends sometime. In that session,
Right.
In that session, I was standing next to him, and he's, we're in between songs, and I'm kind of giving him some input. You don't even need to give him any input, but I get to talk to Dave Grohl about drums.
Right.
But he didn't know I played drums even. I didn't, which wasn't even important. So I'm saying, hey, Dave, I go, this is kind of ironic because this is the time in a record where I might tell the drummer, hey, think of a cool, interesting drum part, like something like Dave Grohl. but the capper would be, think of something like hooky, like Dave Grohl would play. The kind of thing you would see a dude air drumming in a strip club. And Dave Grohl, he just kind of looked at me like, And I realized, I got this download. Oh, he thinks I'm pandering to him. Fuck. But what I forgot to tell him was the second half of the story. There's a reason why I told that story. When I was in a band with Rob Halford, when I was in 2 with Halford, we were getting ready to play some big festivals, like 40 or 50,000 people festival in Minneapolis. And it's just like one of those big radio festivals. So on that bill was Green Day, Cold Chamber, Candlebox, Deftones, our band, and some other bands. But a lot of those bands were staying in the same hotel as us. And so I was really into Deftones. So I told our tour manager, hey, see if call their tour manager and see if the Deftone guys want to come out with us. We'll all go out tonight. And so we did, and they did. And so we got a van. We all went out, and, part of the guys in their band and our guys and some of their crew and our guys. So there was a bunch of us. And we ended up at some kind of like a college bar.
Right.
But eventually, of course, we ended up at a strip club.
You don't say.
Yeah. Rock bands on tour. But it was like one of those really big gentlemen's clubs where there's like 8 stages and it's really swanky.
Okay.
And the Foo Fighters song Everlong is on. And in some of the drums in that song are so kick-ass.
Right.
He manages to just go crazy and turn it into a rad drum hook. He's just going mad.
Right.
It's so good. And that song is playing in this strip club, and I'm at one corner, and I can see across the whole strip club, like maybe across 3 stages, and that song's playing, and there's people, and I can see the guitar player for Deftones sitting at a stage across the room. There's like a girl dancing. He's not paying any attention to her. What he's doing is air drumming all the Dave Grohl drum parts. And I thought, it just like a lightning bolt hit me, go, these drum parts are so cool that the guitar player for Deftones will air drum them at a strip club in public. And I thought, that's how good those drum parts are.
Wow.
So I forgot to tell Dave Grohl that part of my story. I think if I would have...
Then you wouldn't have been pandering.
I wouldn't have been pandering, but I felt so shot down that he looked at me like I was like, no, I'll shut up now. And if I ever get a chance to talk to him again, which I could, I've got like, I mean, it's going to be like, dude, I've been waiting 20 years to finish this story. I've got to tell you it.
All right, let me, before we close this down, let me ask you a question, get your thoughts on it as it relates to music today and what it takes and the obstacles that a young band faces now. Number one, is music now disposable? I
don't think it's disposable. I just don't think anybody wants to pay for it.
Yeah, I'm not gonna let you get away with that.
But let me explain. So, people really, music means a lot to people. It means as much now as it ever has. Right. But people just won't pay for it. So if it was disposable, it would be a thing where they listen to and go, "Oh, I never need to hear that again." Mm-hmm. Like, I can dispose of it.
Okay.
But we live in a world now where now music is free, and so monetizing that from a place of being a band right now, I can't imagine what it would take to have a career as an artist. You have to be 20 years old and have nothing to lose to start with. For the most part, I mean, some people break out. Billie Eilish breaks out from SoundCloud. Yeah. Some people.
Hard though,
but it's crushingly hard. It was hard then, and so. But I heard you guys talking the other day on one of the other podcasts, and I think you made the point, and it's something I've always thought the same thing. Young bands right now, you're 16 years old, you're going to make a band and you want to like be a rock star. You don't really know any of the lore of what it used to be like. Mm-mm. So you don't have that thing as like, it needs to be like that.
They're not jaded.
They don't know that you're supposed to get a record deal for $500,000 and take $100,000 advance on the front end for your band and then pull the back end and and live on it and get a publishing deal. Mm-hmm. They don't know any of that. They just are in it because they love it, and so.
Which was the original spirit anyway.
Totally. That's great. And now now they're learning to be in the music industry in this climate. It's not a surprise to them. It didn't kick their feet out. It's just always been like this. This is just how it is. And and I heard Brian Sykes talking to somebody on his podcast, and it was the first time I heard somebody put it this way. In the old days, you'd make
you'd
make a CD, you'd sell it in the store, and you'd get paid for that CD, and
maybe.
Well, you'd get 12 cents on the dollar, 14 cents on the dollar until your recoup bill was paid off, and then you'd start to make 12 cents on the dollar for everything after that. That's another story, but. They made a good point. Like, that was the old model. You get paid once for somebody buying your CD, and they would listen to it a million times. Mm-hmm. Like you and I listened to our Kiss and Rush records a million times, until they sounded terrible.
Right.
But we only paid for it once. Mm-hmm. Now with streams, I can listen to something a million times, and that band's going to get a million increments of revenue, and they just had to record it once and put it out there, and so.
Don't you think it's such an infinitesimally small amount of money per stream, though?
It is, depending. The different streaming services from YouTube at the bottom they pay almost nothing, up to like Xbox 360. They're all different revenue royalty rates. Some are much better. Apple Music is far better than Spotify and Pandora, and Tidal is better than Apple Music, and so but unfortunately, most people listen to music on the services that don't pay that much, so the bands don't make that much. But I thought that was just an interesting point. Yeah,
it is.
You now it's almost like it's a licensing fee that
that's exactly right.
That the user isn't even really paying. The streaming service is paying the licensing fee. You just get to listen to it. Whether you pay for to not have commercials or have commercials, but so I thought that was an interesting point.
It used to be, and I've said this, I can't tell you how many times, but I believe it's to be true. It used to be that bands would tour to support their record sales. Now they tour to make money. Now, there was some bands who toured to sell T-shirts in the 70s. We get all of that. But a lot of acts went out on the road to support their album sales.
Yeah, that was the old model. And a couple things changed in the old days, a label would sign a band, and they were planning on developing that band over a long period of time, several records.
They were invested in them.
Yeah, and so, the label wouldn't think that, Joe Schmo and the really rad dudes, they didn't think that band was going to blow up on the first record, but they were dedicated to him. We're going to develop this band, and we're going to get him with a good producer, and the next record is going to be a little bit better.
So it was a relationship.
Yeah,
they were going to enter a relationship with the band.
And we're going to send that band out on tour, and if they can't afford to, if they're not making enough money, we'll subsidize their tour with tour support until they can pay for it. Okay. And we're partners, and this relationship was going to last for 3 or 4 or 5 records, and then kind of by the late 2000s that was over. They would still pay for tour support, but your record, like my band Sinistar, we signed a huge record deal, which meant that we were supposed to be the next Beatles. And I learned that I learned a valuable lesson like that. Maybe you don't want to be in a bidding war and have the price driven way up, because then the expectations are so high that no one can live up to them, and so you end up being a disappointment to your label, and then they go, what? They're weighing in. It's very expensive. Let's just cut them. Some bean counter.
Course, right?
Some bean counter accountant guy says, this doesn't make economic sense. Just go ahead and cut those guys. And
but you know what the prevailing theme is? Every book that I read from a rock star of the 60s, 70s, or 80s, it's the same prevailing theme. They all claim to have been getting financially ripped off early on. All of them say the same thing.
Yeah, I believe it. And even if you're not getting totally ripped off, just the way historically the way a major record deal works, you're getting ripped off just because a normal deal is 12, 13 or 14 points, 12 or 13 14 cents on the dollar. So that the label is making 88 cents and you're making 12
That's
cents.
Insane to me.
But if you think about it, they're really venture capitalists.
No question.
They're giving $500,000 or $1 million to 5 rock dudes who are drugged out. They better need a very high return. It makes sense. I get it. But
yeah, if you put it in that context, I totally understand.
Yeah, they're not giving that money to a bunch of dudes with MBAs. They're giving it to a bunch of drugged out idiots who are dysfunctional.
So a lot of the older rockers that I've had the pleasure of talking with over time on this matter all are pissed off. Paul Stanley's pissed off, and I get it. You had these ASCAP checks for decades that are pretty healthy, even in years where you weren't putting out new material. It's hitting your old catalog would bring you revenue.
Yeah,
and then.
We call that the magic money. You get the ASCAP check. You don't know what it's going to be. The magic check is here.
But then, he'll lament in interviews and discussions. What most of them lament from that era, that right around 99, 2000 with Napster and all that entailed there, it kind of went away almost overnight.
Yeah, I saw that firsthand. 2 things. One, when I was negotiating our deal. We were negotiating our deal for Sinistar. The Geffen lawyers had inserted something into the deal that said that any music sold on the internet was 100% the labels. And there was no music being sold on the internet yet. There was this new company called Amazon where people bought books sometimes, and maybe you could buy a CD from this thing called Amazon. So there was no iTunes. And Napster had just started.
Right.
So we were going back and forth fighting with the label about this thing, internet sales, and they literally came back to us and they said, "What is holding up this deal? No one's ever going to buy music on the internet." So I saw that from the beginning, and then about halfway through my production career, I was sitting in a studio with the president of a label, and he just said, matter of fact, he just said, "I don't think we're going to make full-length records anymore because no one really buys them. They just buy single songs off iTunes. I think we're just going to make EPs." And that was actually strategically pretty smart because then they can, anytime a band with a major label or even a band locally that releases something, you have something to go out and market. So the quicker you can keep your turn on new stuff, the more stuff you can market.
Sure.
And when you're in the A game, that means you get an opportunity to grab the Rolling Stone cover. There's only one band that gets to be on that cover, and if you just keep releasing stuff, you can dominate the media cycle.
Yeah, no, I get that.
And so it made sense, but I just remember thinking at the time, I was still like I heard the president of a label say that, but I didn't believe it. My head is like, that's not going to happen, because in the back of my head is, if they don't make records, I don't make money.
Right.
So I'm like, that's not going to happen, but it happened.
Yeah. And the death of an album is terrible, though. The concept to me as a music fan, and I'm romanticizing what you and I experienced in the 70s as kids, where I remember having my confirmation at church and having some kind of party afterwards my parents threw for me, and in the neighborhood, families would come, and I had like $80. They gave me $80, and my parents took half of it.
Straight to the record store.
I took that $40 to the National Record Mart here, and I remember, I can tell you what I bought. I think I bought Rush Archives, the first 3 records, and I think I bought a Kiss record, and I came home going, look at this. I mean, you could feel it, you could touch it, it was tangible. You could open up the sleeves, it had a smell to it. You'd read all the liner notes. I knew who Skip Gildersleeve was of Rush, because his name would appear on every record, and he is now the stage production manager. Why I knew that shit, I don't know why it was relevant, but it was part of the experience of enjoying music as a kid in the 70s. And that is gone.
Yeah, 100%. I was that same kid. I would open up that record, and I would pull. And hopefully, if it's a winner, the record folds open.
Gatefold.
Yeah, and it's one record, but it opens up, and it's like a double pen, and then you pull out the sleeve, and it's got something on that too. And I would absorb every name. I knew every name, everything, and I romanticized everything about it. So when I was touring all over the world and playing giant concerts, I would just think, I'm doing that thing that.
How amazing is that?
When I was a kid, I would go with binoculars to a concert, and my mom would just let me go. She was like, I was super latchkey kid. So I was like 14, and I'm going to like Ted Nugent concerts.
Right on.
And I've got binoculars, and people are smoking weed, and I don't care. Like, I'm just there by myself. My mom leaves me off at the arena, and I'm like, I got my binoculars, and I'm like looking at the sound guy and all the equipment and the road cases, and I'm looking at the lights, and I'm just absorbing every little detail, and it means so much to me. And then finally, when I would just be like at a big festival, and like, I'm on stage and I'm just surrounded by all of that. It's me. I get to do it. And I would look over my shoulder playing, and I would see bands that were my peers that I loved, like, oh, there's so-and-so from such and such band. They're watching us play. And it was so cool just to know that this other guy that you think is so great, he's watching me play. Awesome.
What a ride, man. What a trip.
And just to get to do that was so cool.
I bet. My friend, this was great.
Yeah.
Did you have fun?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I know you're going to be selling this building, and you'll probably be moving to the desert, but I'd love to have you back on.
Oh, I would love to come back. I've got a gazillion rock stories.
I know you do.
I only touched the surface of the G-rated ones today.
Well, what I like to do is once we get past this pandemic and we can have you in the studio here, because we're obviously in 2 rooms now, Freddie Coelho, my sidekick, we talked about Fred earlier, the longtime journeyman roadie and guitar tech for these people. I'd love to have him here, because I think he'd have a ton more questions for you, and I think that you both could share some stories together.
That sounds fantastic. I had a great time, and I look forward to doing it again, for sure.
I appreciate
absolutely.
All right, Sid, thank you, my friend.
Cool, take care.
Friends, we are out.